The human expedition had arrived at the distant star system with high hopes. They were there to investigate an alien artifact discovered in the wreckage of a ship from a long-lost civilization. The crew, consisting of skilled scientists, engineers, and military personnel, had prepared for every possible challenge. The planet, rich in resources, was unlike anything they had ever encountered. As they approached the surface in their landing craft, they could see that it was a world full of strange and wild landscapes with towering mountains and deep, uncharted forests. But what they didn't expect was that the planet was far from uninhabited. A race of terrifying alien predators, creatures known as the Orcs, lived here. These enormous beings were said to hunt anything that wandered into their territory with ruthless efficiency. The Orcs were massive, their bodies covered in thick armored skin and sharp, deadly claws. Their eyes, dark and cold, seemed to pierce through the very soul of anyone who dared approach. For years, the Orcs had been the stuff of legends, stories told to warn off explorers and travelers from coming too close. The humans had been briefed on the potential dangers, but the legends hadn't prepared them for the reality. When the crew first set foot on the planet's surface, they moved cautiously, setting up their equipment and scanning the area for any signs of the creatures. They had hoped to avoid conflict, focusing on their mission and not wanting to provoke the deadly predators. Tensions were high, as the crew knew they were stepping into an unknown and potentially hostile environment. As they ventured deeper into the dense forest, the air grew thick with an eerie silence, the kind of silence that only deepened the feeling of being watched. Then, without warning, the attack came. The ground trembled as massive shapes appeared from the shadows, moving with terrifying speed and precision. The Orcs had found them. The humans quickly formed defensive positions, but they were outmatched. The Orcs moved in, their claws slashing through the air, and their growls echoed through the forest. It was clear that these predators had no intention of allowing the humans to leave. The team fought back, using everything in their arsenal, but the creatures were relentless, overpowering the humans' attempts to defend themselves. It seemed like all hope was lost, and the soldiers braced themselves for the inevitable. That's when something unexpected happened. Among the chaos and violence of the attack, the Orcs suddenly paused. They stopped moving, their eyes narrowing, as they locked onto one individual in the group. It was Alex, a young and unassuming scientist who had been part of the expedition. He wasn't a soldier, nor a trained fighter like the others, just a researcher who had never been in combat. But as the Orcs approached, Alex didn't flinch. Instead, he stood there, his eyes locked on the predators in front of him, his body still and steady, almost as though he was willing them to back down. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The Orcs, the unstoppable, fierce creatures, who had never hesitated in the face of any foe, were uncertain. They circled around Alex, sniffing the air and growling softly, but they didn't attack. The humans watched in stunned silence, unsure of what they were witnessing. The Orcs were infamous for never showing fear, but now they were hesitating. One by one, the massive creatures began to retreat, slowly backing away from Alex without taking their eyes off him. There was no physical force stopping them. There was no weapon that made them pause. It was something different, something entirely unseen before. The humans couldn't explain it. They had seen nothing like it in any of the reports or simulations. They had been trained for combat, for survival. But this was something else, entirely. Alex, still standing tall, seemed as confused as everyone else. His heart raced, but he didn't move. The moment stretched on, long enough to feel like an eternity. Finally, with a final glance at Alex, the Orcs turned and disappeared into the jungle, leaving the humans in an uneasy silence. The tension was thick in the air, and the crew was left wondering what had just happened. What was it about Alex that made the deadliest predators in the galaxy back away in fear? It was a mystery that would haunt them all, one that would raise more questions than answers. Back aboard their ship, the crew gathered in the briefing room, still reeling from the strange and terrifying encounter on the surface. The fact that they had survived was a miracle in itself, but the mystery of what had made the Carrick's predators hesitate lingered in the air like a heavy fog. Everyone was asking the same question. Why had the creatures, known for their viciousness and relentless nature, stopped in their tracks when they came face to face with Alex? No one had any clear answers, only theories. Some speculated that it was a trick of the mind, a brief moment of fear or confusion that caused the predators to hesitate. Others wondered if the Carricks had sensed something they couldn't comprehend. But the truth remained elusive, and the crew found themselves unable to shake the feeling that they had uncovered something far more extraordinary than they could have imagined. Alex, however, couldn't stop thinking about it. The young scientist had been shaken by the event, but as the days passed, a strange pattern began to form. It wasn't just the encounter with the Carricks that haunted Alex. It was the dreams. At night, as he drifted into sleep, he found himself plunged into vivid, surreal visions. He was standing on the edge of a vast, untamed wilderness, surrounded by towering trees and shadowed caves. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and ancient stone. In these dreams, Alex felt a connection to something far older than himself, something primal that seemed to awaken within him with every passing moment. He could hear whispers in the wind, voices that seemed to come from the depths of his own mind, voices that spoke of survival, of fear, of instincts buried deep within human history. He saw images of distant ancestors, hunters and gatherers, warriors and survivors. He saw their struggles, their battles against nature, and he felt their raw, unrelenting will to live, a will so powerful that it could overcome any obstacle, any threat, any predator. As the dreams continued, Alex began to realize something startling. These visions weren't random. They were memories embedded in his very being. The human species, he came to understand, had developed a unique trait, something that no other species in the galaxy seemed to possess. It was an unyielding survival instinct, a primal force that ran through every human being, buried deep within their genetic code. This instinct wasn't just about physical strength or cunning. It was something far more subtle and powerful. It was the ability to convey an unshakable will to live, through body language, through facial expressions, and through sheer determination. It was a force that could be felt by those around them, even by the deadliest creatures in the galaxy. The Carricks, Alex realized, had sensed it. The moment they locked eyes with him, they had felt it too. The human will to survive, so intense and pure that it sent a shiver through the predator's spines. They had never encountered anything like it before, and it was that very force that had caused them to retreat, hesitant and unsure. As Alex shared these revelations with the rest of the crew, a sense of awe mixed with fear spread through the room. The implications of what he had discovered were enormous. If this trait was real, it could change everything. The crew members, who had once seen themselves as nothing more than explorers in a vast and dangerous universe, now realized that they possessed a weapon, a psychological weapon, that no other species could match. But there was one major problem. They didn't know how to control it. The human will to survive wasn't something that could be activated at will. It wasn't something they could simply turn on in a moment of danger. It was a force that arose from deep within, an instinct that could be unpredictable and uncontrollable. The crew was left with more questions than answers. How could they harness this power? Could it be used strategically? And most importantly, how could they ensure that it would work when they needed it the most? As the days passed, the crew began to experiment with this newfound trait, attempting to understand its limits and potential. They conducted psychological tests, observing their own reactions under pressure, but nothing seemed to provide a clear answer. Alex, who seemed to have a stronger connection to this trait than the others, was both fascinated and frustrated. He could sense it within himself, the dormant power that he couldn't quite grasp. There were moments when he felt it surge, but in those moments, it was too overwhelming to control. The crew realized that they were on the cusp of something groundbreaking, something that could give them an advantage over the dangers of the galaxy. But until they could understand how to control this mysterious trait, they were still vulnerable, caught in the uncertainty of a power they didn't yet fully comprehend. On the alien homeworld of the Jar, the atmosphere in the War Council was thick with tension. The Jar were a fearsome species, known across the galaxy for their predatory nature and unmatched hunting abilities. For generations, they had roamed the stars, encountering and eliminating threats to their territory with ruthless efficiency. They had seen many species, from the mightiest of beasts to the most cunning of civilizations, but nothing had prepared them for what they had witnessed on that remote planet. The humans, the Jar leaders, a council of the most powerful warriors and strategists in the species, gathered around a massive circular table in their war chamber. They were baffled, their minds struggling to process what they had seen. The humans, weak by their standards, had an extraordinary presence, something that had disrupted their natural instincts. In every encounter with a potential prey, the Jar had relied on their senses and predatory drive to overcome any threat. But with the humans, something was different. When they faced Alex, one of the human explorers, their instincts had faltered. There had been a moment of hesitation, something they couldn't understand. It wasn't fear, but something more subtle, an aura of sheer willpower, a defiance so strong that it had caused even the deadliest predators to pause. The council was divided. On one side, the most traditionalist faction of the Jar wanted to eliminate humanity as a threat immediately, seeing the potential of these strange creatures as a dangerous unknown. They argued that the hesitation shown by the Carracks in the presence of the humans was a sign of weakness. Weakness could not be tolerated. They suggested launching a full-scale attack, eradicating the humans before they had the chance to learn more and become a serious challenge to the Jar's dominance. However, there was another faction within, the leadership that disagreed. This faction, led by a younger and more strategic-minded general named Var, saw an opportunity. "What we witnessed on that planet," Var said, his voice steady but filled with an underlying curiosity, "was not weakness. It was something else. Something we've never encountered before." His tone was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "We don't know what caused the Carracks to hesitate, but I propose we learn from them. If we understand this will to live that they possess, we might be able to unlock an advantage we never imagined." The room fell into a heavy silence as Var's words sank in. For the first time, the council's leaders began to consider the possibility that humanity wasn't just another prey species. They were something else, something unpredictable. "Humans are unlike anything we've ever encountered," Var continued. "Their presence alone disrupts our instincts. If we can study them, learn their behavior, understand their biology, we might gain insight into this mysterious force. It could be the key to understanding how they survived the attack. We may even be able to harness it for our own benefit." This idea was radical. The Jar had never studied another species in such a way. They had always relied on their physical strength, their predatory skills, and their knowledge of combat. But this was different. What was this mysterious will to live? And how could it be used to their advantage? Var's proposal sparked a heated debate among the council members. Some still saw the humans as nothing more than a curiosity, a fluke in their hunting cycle. But others, drawn by the idea of unlocking a new form of power, began to lean toward the suggestion. If the humans could display this unknown trait so powerfully, then surely it was something that could be studied, understood, and possibly used. After much deliberation, the council came to a decision. A delegation would be sent to the humans, not to destroy them, but to observe and study them. They would infiltrate the humans' territory and learn from them, without revealing their true intentions. The delegation, however, would not be composed of just any Jar warriors. It would be made up of the most intelligent and perceptive members of their species, those with a deep understanding of biology and behavior. They would work in secret, gathering as much information as possible without revealing themselves, but the Jar had no idea what they were truly stepping into. They didn't know the depth of the humans' power, nor the dangers they might face in the process. The humans, as they had already shown, were not as easy to understand or defeat as the Jar had expected. As the council disbanded, the leaders couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, one that might turn the tide of the galaxy in ways they hadn't even begun to imagine. The game had changed, and the Jar were about to learn that humanity, with all its strange and unpredictable qualities, was not to be underestimated. As the humans grew more aware of the Jar's interest in their species, they began to take steps to understand the mysterious power that had saved them from the alien predators. The crew, led by Alex, decided to conduct their own experiments in a controlled environment aboard their ship. They needed to understand the nature of the will to live that had proven so effective in the face of danger. The team knew they were being watched, perhaps by the Jar, or even by other alien races that might have taken an interest in humanity's strange survival trait. So they created a series of simulations, each designed to push the human body and mind to the edge. The tests were grueling, meant to expose the participants to extreme fear and life-threatening situations. Dangerous creatures from other worlds were brought in, alien beasts capable of terrifying speed and strength. These simulations weren't just physical tests. They were designed to manipulate the human mind, placing individuals in terrifying situations where the only option was survival. As the tests began, the results were astounding. Humans, when faced with life-or-death situations, did not just rely on strength or agility. They exhibited something far more profound. It was a psychological force, a raw will to survive that seemed to surge from within, becoming a powerful aura that radiated outward. The more extreme the situation, the more intense the survival instinct became. The crew observed with fascination as humans in these tests not only fought back, but began to exert an influence over the environment around them, almost as if their sheer desire to live could alter the behavior of their would-be predators. It wasn't just physical power. There was something intangible about this instinct, a force that even the deadliest of creatures could sense. When humans reached their breaking point, when they teetered on the edge of death, their aura of survival became overwhelming, so potent that it could make even the fiercest predators hesitate, falter, and sometimes retreat. Among all the participants, Alex seemed to possess this power the most strongly. It was almost as if the survival instinct ran through his veins like wildfire. His heart rate would spike during the simulations, his body pushed to its limits, yet instead of succumbing to panic, Alex's expression would shift into one of absolute defiance, a determination that was palpable. He wasn't just trying to survive. He was willing the universe around him to let him live. His very presence seemed to radiate an energy that could freeze the air, a silent challenge to any force that sought to bring him down. It was during one particular test that the true power of Alex's survival instinct became undeniable. The simulated predator, a massive, terrifying alien creature, lunged at him with lightning speed, its jaws snapping as it aimed for his throat. As the predator closed in, Alex's face hardened into an expression of unwavering resistance, his eyes narrowing as if daring the creature to strike. In that instant, something extraordinary happened. The predator, whose attacks had been unstoppable, until now faltered. Its aggressive charge slowed, its eyes wide with what could only be described as confusion and fear. It hesitated, just for a split second, and that moment was enough. The predator, once intent on devouring its prey, began to back away slowly, as though an invisible force had made it reconsider the fight. The humans watching this scene could hardly believe their eyes. It wasn't just the predator's hesitation that stunned them. It was the sheer force of will that Alex had summoned. It wasn't fear that radiated from him. It was an unyielding resolve, an aura of survival so powerful that it had reached out and influenced the very nature of the threat before him. The predator, as powerful as it was, had been unable to overcome the human's defiant spirit. The simulation ended, and Alex stood there, breathless but unharmed, his eyes still locked on the place where the predator had been moments before. The crew was silent for a long time, processing what they had just witnessed. It was clear that this wasn't just a fluke. This was something deeply ingrained in the human psyche, a weapon they could wield without even realizing it. As the team continued their experiments, they were faced with more questions than answers. How could they control this incredible power? Could Alex's ability be replicated by others, or was it unique to him? And most importantly, how could they use this force to protect themselves from the Jar or any other alien threat that might be watching them? There was still so much they didn't understand about the true nature of the human survival instinct. But one thing was certain. Humanity had something that no other species could match, and it was a force that, when unleashed, could turn the tide in even the most dangerous of encounters. The humans were no longer just explorers. They were survivors. And they had the power to prove it. The Jar, with their minds set on eradicating humanity, launched their long-planned assault on the human colony. The first wave came like a storm, a massive swarm of alien warriors descending upon the colony with ruthless precision. The Jar were known for their strength and savagery, and they believed the humans would be no different from the countless species they had wiped out before. Their initial confidence was unshakable. However, as the Jar crossed into human territory, they began to experience something unusual, something that made them hesitate, something they couldn't comprehend. The land itself seemed to push back. The very air felt heavy, filled with an oppressive energy. The Jar warriors found themselves distracted, uncertain, their usually razor-sharp instincts muddled by an invisible force. It was as if the land itself was alive, fighting against them. The first signs of confusion came when a few of the Jar scouts, normally fearless and deadly, began to retreat from their positions, muttering to each other in agitation. They could sense it, the strange aura that seemed to emanate from the humans. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of resistance, but it was growing stronger. The humans, fully aware of their unique survival trait, had prepared for this moment. They had learned how to harness their will to survive and were using it as a shield. The colony, which had once seemed vulnerable, now felt like a fortress, not made of walls and weapons, but of the sheer determination of its inhabitants. As the battle raged on, the Jar's usual fearlessness began to crack. The warriors, driven by the instinct to hunt and destroy, found themselves faltering when they faced human soldiers. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were pushing forward, relentlessly, with an intensity that the Jar had never encountered before. It wasn't just about fighting for survival. It was something far deeper. Humans were fighting with an ancient, raw energy, an instinct that surged through their every movement. It was in their eyes, in their posture, in the way they refused to give up. The Jar, for the first time, began to question their own instincts, unsure of why they were hesitating in the face of such defiance. The turning point came when a Jar commander, a battle-hardened leader who had led countless raids across the galaxy, came face to face with a human soldier. The soldier was cornered, injured, and surrounded, yet there was something in the human's gaze that made the commander pause. The soldier's expression was one of pure resolve, not fear, but an unyielding will to survive, to protect his home. The commander felt it, a pressure in the air, a force that seemed to come from the very soul of the human standing before him. For a split second, The Jar commander's instincts faltered. His body froze, and in that moment, the commander felt fear. Not the fear of death, but the fear of something he couldn't understand. The force of the human's will was so overpowering that it caused the commander to retreat, breaking his orders and pulling his forces back. It was a moment of chaos, an alien predator retreating against its own will. The humans, seeing their chance, rallied together with newfound hope. They knew now that their survival instinct wasn't just a physical force, it was psychological, a weapon that could disrupt even the fiercest of attackers. Using this, they launched a counterattack, pushing back the Shar with surprising strength and unity. The Shar were formidable, but they had underestimated humanity's will to survive. As the battle intensified, the Shar warriors, who had once believed themselves unstoppable, began to feel the weight of the humans' defiance. The warriors that pressed forward grew more cautious, unsure of what they were truly up against. The tide of the battle turned. The humans, now fully aware of their ability to fight back in a way that was beyond physical combat, used their newfound power to defend their home. With every passing hour, the Shar found themselves driven further, back. The human survival instinct, once a mystery, had become a weapon of incredible strength. It wasn't just that the humans were fighting for their lives, it was that they were fighting with something more, something the Jar had never experienced before. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for the soul, a battle that humanity was determined to win. By the end of the day, the Jar's once unbreakable resolve had crumbled. The warriors that had entered with the intent to conquer were now retreating, unsure of what had just happened. Humanity had proven itself not through brute force, but through the sheer power of its will to live. The Jar had underestimated them, and in doing so, they had made a mistake they would never forget. The humans, for the first time, had not only survived but had forced the invaders to back away, shaken and uncertain. The battle was far from over, but humanity had just won its first victory, and it was a victory that would echo across the galaxy. In the wake of their crushing defeat, the Shar found themselves grappling with a feeling they had never experienced before: uncertainty. The fierce predators, once convinced of their superiority, had been thrown off balance by humanity's mysterious will to survive. The humans, though smaller and weaker physically, had proven they possessed something far greater, an instinct so powerful it had turned the tide of battle. The Jar had no choice but to rethink their strategy. For the first time, they weren't the hunters. They were the ones being hunted, not by physical force, but by something far more elusive. Realizing that the humans' power was unlike anything they had ever encountered, the Jar made a decision that shocked their entire race. Instead of continuing their campaign of destruction, they sought understanding. A delegation of Jar leaders, led by the very commander who had fled in fear, was sent to meet with humanity. The commander, whose mind had been scarred by his own retreat, now saw the humans not as mere prey, but as a species whose strength lay in something far more profound than he could have imagined. The Jar had no intention of engaging in another battle. They came with a proposal, an uneasy truce. They would no longer seek humanity's destruction, but instead wish to learn from them, to understand the power behind their survival instinct. It was a bold move, one that reflected a deep shift in the Xr's perspective. However, there was one problem. The humans were deeply skeptical. How could they trust a race that had just tried to wipe them out? How could they believe in a peace offered by those who had shown them no mercy? Tensions ran high as the Jar delegation arrived, and a fragile peace seemed like an impossible goal. The humans, led by their top commanders and scientists, were wary. Every member of the delegation felt the weight of the past conflict, and it colored every word spoken during the negotiations. The Jar tried to convey their desire to learn, to understand the mysterious force that had repelled them, but it was clear that the humans were hesitant. Some of the crew members wanted to reject the Tsar's offer outright, believing that the predators could never be trusted again. But Alex, who had already proven himself to be the embodiment of humanity's power, knew that the future of their species depended on understanding this new dynamic. He understood that their survival wasn't just about fighting, but about knowing when to use their strength wisely. With quiet determination, Alex stepped forward to represent humanity. His presence in the room was almost palpable, calm, measured, yet exuding an inner strength that could be felt by anyone in the room. As he stood before the Tsar leaders, Alex didn't speak a word at first. Instead, he allowed them to feel the force of his will. His very being radiated an energy that was unlike anything the Tsar had ever felt. The commander, who had once retreated in fear, now found himself facing the full intensity of humanity's resolve. The air grew thick with tension as the Tsar leaders experienced something they could not understand. It wasn't just that Alex was unafraid, it was that his entire presence seemed to challenge the very concept of fear itself. In that moment, they felt it, the raw, unyielding will to survive that had driven the humans to victory. It was not an instinct that could be measured by physical strength or military tactics. It was something deeper, a mental and emotional force that transcended everything they had ever known. As Alex stood there, silently projecting his strength, the Tsar began to grasp the full scale of what humanity was capable of. It wasn't just about physical survival, it was a psychological force, an emotion that could shape the course of a battle and change the course of history. For the first time, the Tsar leaders understood that the power of the human species wasn't something they could conquer with weapons. It wasn't something they could defeat in combat. This power was rooted in a profound, almost spiritual will to live, and it was something that, once understood, could not easily be ignored. The Tsar delegation, once eager to dominate, now found themselves in awe. They saw not just an enemy, but a potential ally, one whose unique strength could change the very fabric of galactic power. The uneasy truce that was proposed was not just about stopping the fighting, it was about forging a new understanding between two species, one based on respect for what each could offer. The Tsar had come seeking knowledge, but in that moment, they realized that they were the ones who had much to learn. With the negotiations continuing under tense, but more respectful, terms, the humans and Tsar began to slowly carve a path toward understanding. The meeting was far from over, and the trust between the two species was still fragile, but the seeds of cooperation had been planted. For Alex and the humans, the true challenge was just beginning. How could they navigate this new, uncertain future with a species that had once been their greatest enemy? But one thing was clear: their survival instinct had already reshaped the course of history. And now, it might be their greatest tool in forging a new era of understanding. The galaxy had changed forever. Humanity, once just a fledgling species, on the edge of the stars, had carved out its place among the great powers of the universe. The truce with the Tsar had marked the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one where survival was no longer just about fending off predators, but about understanding the incredible strength within themselves. The Tsar, who had once been the embodiment of deadly precision and fearsome hunters, now viewed humans not as prey, but as equals, at least in the sense that they now understood humanity's greatest power, their unbreakable will to survive. It was a power that had proven itself in battle and had won them the respect of the most formidable species in the galaxy. With the truce now solidified, the Tsar, having learned the value of this unique trait, offered their assistance to humanity in exploring new star systems, sharing their vast knowledge of the galaxy's dangers, and helping to protect the weak from the terrifying predators that roam the cosmos. But even as alliances were forged and promises made, the humans remained cautious. They understood better than anyone how fragile peace could be. While the Tsar had agreed to respect their survival instincts, humanity knew that the galaxy was vast, filled with threats far beyond even the Shar's knowledge. The universe was an unpredictable and dangerous place, and they had only just begun to scratch the surface. The humans were ready to explore, to push forward into the unknown, but they knew that they must always be prepared for the next challenge. Their survival instinct, that unyielding drive to live no matter the cost, was their greatest weapon, and they would wield it wisely. Under this new alliance, humanity began its journey beyond their homeworld, venturing into the stars with both hope and caution in their hearts. The Jar, once their enemies, now stood by their side as guides, assisting in navigating the dangers that lurked on the edges of the galaxy. But even the Jar could not predict what awaited in the farthest reaches of space. The human colonies expanded, each new world a reminder that survival was not just about holding on to life. It was about thriving, exploring, and carving out a place in the universe where humanity's spirit could flourish. However, the humans were not naive. While the Jar had taught them much, there were still many unknowns. The legacy of humanity's survival instinct was not just about the physical battle. It was about adaptability, resilience, and the relentless drive to keep going no matter what. There would be times of peace, but there would also be times of conflict. The universe had its predators, but humanity had its will to survive. And this trait would continue to echo through the galaxy, a beacon of hope to some and a weapon against those who would threaten them. The final scene showed humanity, standing at the edge of the cosmos, poised and ready to face whatever came next. The ships of the human fleet, once a symbol of fragile hope, now gleamed with strength and purpose. The stars stretched out before them, an endless expanse filled with both mystery and promise. Humanity, united, set their sights on the distant horizons, knowing that whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together. Their legacy, forged in the fires of survival, would echo through the ages as a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The galaxy was vast, but humanity had proven one undeniable truth. No matter what stood in their way, they would never back down. Their will to survive would carry them forward into the unknown, and in the silence of space, their resolve would be heard by all.